Hey guys, this is Dan Seidel. I've been leading you, guiding you on your journey during this session for the first part of your thesis writing process. The thesis statement, the prospectus, the bibliography. And I do want to say I didn't set up the course the way it is. Professor George set it up with the requirements. This is my first time in helping her out and working with the thesis students, and for that I'm quite grateful. And so I'm trying to get used to the process, the weekly process and the weekly assignments and utilizing Canvas, etc. What I've tried to do is read through your prospectuses to comment on them, but not comment on the peer-reviewed ones. So I encourage you to write me an email, ask me any specific questions like some of you have done already, and I appreciate that very much. And I would hope that you would do that throughout the next 8 weeks when we're together in the actual process of writing the thesis. But I did want to have I decided to tape this video rather than writing a long email, because I thought there are some things that would be helpful for you, that I'm getting, helpful for you to think about as I'm reading through your thesis statements, your prospectus, the bibliography and the annotated bibliography. First of all, an important thing to keep in mind is that the first 2 chapters of your thesis, and what that implies, it's the first 2 chapters of at least a 4-chapter thesis. That means it's not a 15-page paper. It means it's not a 20-page paper. We're talking about 4 20-page papers. We're talking about 4 sections, at least. And so there is a lot of space that you have to fill with original thinking. The first 2 chapters, the first chapter is the introduction. And the introduction isn't just going to be a paragraph. It's going to have to be a substantial paper that introduces the context. It introduces the framework. It introduces why this study exists. Is there room in the literature for this kind of study? What are the definitions of your terms? What does spirituality mean? What does abstraction mean? What does nostalgia mean? What does trauma mean? What does a successful artist mean? What does the market mean? All of the terms that you've been using in various ways in your prospectus are going to have to get unpacked. I think they have to be dealt with in much more specific terms. And so by laying out the contours of your study, and then what its perspective, its methodological base, how it's going to proceed. The second chapter is a literature review. And the implications of that are significant. What that means is you have to read the literature. This bibliography that you're producing and the exercise of an annotated bibliography. The annotated bibliography is evidence of your reading of it. You're reading those texts, and then you are demonstrating why it's important for your study. Just to say it's good or not, or it's detailed or not, or that it provides this or that information isn't sufficient. And you have to show evidence of actually reading through it. So the bibliography that you're presenting is not just a list of sources, as if those exist separately than your thesis. That bibliography are going to be sources that you've actually read, studied closely, and are influencing and shaping your work. So if you are, and certainly the broader framework of your work, if you're focusing on aspects of psychology, if you're focusing on aspects of religion and spirituality, if you're focusing on aspects of popular culture or aspects of capitalist culture or the art market, etc., your bibliography, which means your research, has to show evidence of reading in religious studies, in social theory, in market theory, in psychology, etc., in art historical historiography. So you lay a framework within a context of religious studies to talk about spirituality and religion in abstract art. How is art, what are the methodological means by which art functions as a means of thinking about spirituality or thinking about spiritual experience? And if you're concerned with aesthetic experience, you have to read philosophers who are reflecting philosophically on aesthetic experience. And is there a literature out there where philosophers are comparing aesthetic experience with religious experience, with the experience of art and the experience of religion? And there are. And you have to find them and you have to read them. If you're focusing on the art market, if you're focusing on celebrity culture, if you're focusing on successful artists or the value of art, you have to prove, you have to define your terms and set out a social, and you have to set out a sociological, social, and cultural context within which those terms are operative, within which your work, your artists and then works of art are operating as a way of signaling that. So for many of you, you are starting, my sense is that you're starting at stage 6 of 10 steps, and you need to start back at stage 1. You need to start with the very basic. You need to be like the football coach Vince Lombardi that holds up a football and says, this is a football. Begin with defining your terms. Begin with making an argument about why you're selecting these artists. Why these 2 artists and not any hundreds of other 2 artists? Why are you comparing them? Why are you saying that this artist and that artist are evidence of successful artists? What do you mean by that? And then how do these artists, how can you compare them and contrast them? How does your work continue work that's already been influenced by work that's already done on these artists and on this question, these broader questions? And how does it carve out new ground? And you have to be able to say, the literature, there isn't much evidence on. The literature says this about these artists, but I'm going to say this other thing. But you have to quote what the literature says about those artists. Right? You're making the argument to a reader that needs to have it proven to them. And so all of that is the foundation that is being built. And so for many of you, my comments have been define your terms. Define your terms. You need to back up. You need to focus on this. You need to focus on that. Before you can get to these points, you're making certain assumptions that don't exist. You have to show your work. It's like a math problem. I don't want the answer. I want to see your work. I want to see you get to that point. I want to see all your work, all those stages in which you're building your case. So I hope these thoughts are helpful to you. And I think I will try to do these video chats more regularly for you next session. And if you find it helpful, let me know, and I will do more. And if you've got questions, write me an email. I'll be happy to respond to them. All right, take care. Have a great Friday and a great weekend. Oh, and also, I know this thesis is overwhelming to you, and it can be overwhelming with all the million other things that you're doing. Take one bite at a time. Focus one moment at a time. You can only eat the elephant one bite at a time. And so don't panic. Set out your steps. And don't be overwhelmed with the bigness of it. All right, take care.